I really think that my journey started back in 2008, and that's the year that my sister committed suicide. And so that's kind of where God really started working in me, I think. But I'm going to tell y'all where I kind of came from when I was a child. I went to church a little bit. It was actually the church right up the street by the high school with my cousin and my two cousins and their family. We didn't go very often, but we did go, a little bit. I didn't really know much. I was about 5 at the time. But in 1995, one of my cousins, she died when she was 11. It was something she was born with. I don't know the exact medical term. But when she died, it kind of really impacted our family a lot, as you can imagine. Her parents just said, God, where's God? Where was he in all of this? They really turned away from the church. And so we stopped going. And after that, I never went back to church. We didn't talk about God. God was never really discussed in my house. We would every once in a while mention him. We'd talk about going to church on Easter or Christmas, but we never went through. It was always something else came up, or some excuse not to go. Whenever I was a sophomore in high school, I met a coach, and she was a really good Christian woman. And so she was in charge of the Fellowship of Christian Athletes, which some people may or may not know of. And it was a really cool organization. We would meet up usually on Wednesday mornings at about 7:30 and just fellowship time. And so that was a really neat experience for me to be able to be around other people that were confident in their faith. But I really didn't pursue it much. I just kind of let it all go. Then I was like, it's not really for me. I didn't really want to change because to be a Christian, you have to change who you are. And I wasn't ready for that change. I stayed in that group all the way through high school. I graduated in 2008. And then in August of 2008 is when my sister died. I didn't know her. She was 37. We had the same dad. But she and I never had a relationship. She came to see me one time whenever I was a baby. But she never came back because she couldn't stand to be near our dad. And so, it kind of just went on like that. She was 19 whenever I was born. She was going off to college, starting her life. And so it wasn't meant to be kind of a thing. And so when she died, I really didn't know how to feel. I really didn't react, the way that you would if you lost your sister today, for anyone in here that has a sibling. I just kind of was like, well, it's sad because she committed suicide. It's a horrible way to die. But my life kept going. And so I actually got a job, my first job, the same day she died. I can still remember that day. It was one of the best days I've ever had. But to think of what she was going through kind of, dampens that day. I started college that year. I got, again, my first job. Things are going really well for me. But it started to really kind of weigh on me, the things I was missing out on, that I'd missed out on with her, and that I was going to miss out on. She had 2 daughters at the time of her death. They were both like 7, 10 years old in that area. And so that was really, it was hard to deal with, just the thought of never getting to meet them, because they live in Georgia. And her parents, her mom and dad, don't really have a good relationship with my niece's dad. And so it really started to bring me down. I really started to feel depressed. And but it didn't faze me too much. I was still moving forward. I got a new job at Scott & White, working in housekeeping, which is not a fun job for anyone in here that knows. It was actually cleaning labor and delivery rooms. So that's not something, it was not fun. But, I'm thankful for it. That is for sure. I was able to meet my sister's mom. I found her on Facebook, and I asked her, I was like, will you meet with me and tell me about her? Because I wanted to know who she was, just because, again, she was my sister. And so we met up one day at Olive Garden. And I'm telling you, I was so nervous that day. I'm like, what is this woman going to think of me? Is she going to hate me? Is she going to, just be this nice, sweet person, or this mean, evil lady? Because I didn't know anything about her. My mom didn't know anything about her. And when I met her, she was and is the most kind-hearted woman I've ever met before in my entire life. She had this love for her daughter that I see pretty much with everyone in here that has kids. You just see how much she loved her. But then you could also see that sadness in her, the fact that her daughter was gone and that she killed herself. But we met up, and she told me about her, and it was a really awesome day. But after that, that's when things really went downhill for me, because I knew what an awesome woman I had missed out on getting to know. But my sister was a godly woman. She did believe in God. She believed in his word. Her favorite scripture was Jeremiah 29:11, which is, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope in a future." And so she believed in that, but the one thing with depression, which is what she was dealing with, is there's no light at the end of the tunnel. You have that darkness. It's just complete darkness. There's nothing at the end that gives you any hope. And so that's what pretty much ended her life. And so the depression, it runs in our family. That was something that I found out not long after that, because we have another sister who also suffers from depression. And after the whole thing with my sister dying, we found out that my grandmother also committed suicide at age 37. And so it was one of those things. It was like, okay, it's in my bloodline. It's, and when it hit me pretty hard. I shut down. My mom and I were very, very close up until that point, because I just completely shut her out. I didn't want her to be in my life in the way that she had been. I didn't want to tell her things because I didn't want her to be worried, because if I had told her the stuff that I was going through and dealing with, she would have been worried, because you can pretty much say I was suicidal. I had started cutting myself, and I was just really thinking that there's no point in living. What's the point? There's nothing to live for. And that's what depression does. It grabs a hold of you. But like I had said, I was in college at the time, and I was a psychology major. So I knew that I needed to get some help. And I knew deep in my heart I didn't want to die. And so I was like, I've got to get help. And I did. I started seeing a counselor, and that was one of the best decisions I've ever made, because she really helped me. When I first started going, she really, really pushed for me to get on antidepressants. She was like, you need them. Said, we need to start on the antidepressants, and then we can start working through things. And I was like, no, because the way I looked at antidepressants is that they just masked the problem. They didn't let you actually work through them. But things were not getting any better. Even with seeing her, I was still depressed. I was still, thinking bad thoughts. And so I agreed. I finally said, okay, I'm gonna get on the medication, and I did, and it helped a lot. I was like, okay, you were right, And I became happier. I was happier at home. I was happier in my job. And my life started to turn around. It really got better. I started doing more things, being happier, smiling, laughing. My mom and our relationship got better. But how the saying goes is that when you get through one thing, something else comes along. And something else did come along that pretty much my entire world came crashing in around me. In psychology, and I'm sure other areas, you study about repressed memories. And that's, it's a memory that's very traumatic that you bury inside because it's too painful to deal with. And that's what I did. I guess it was probably in July of 2010, I started having these flashbacks of whenever I was about 5 years old, of my cousin who I was very close with. He was like my brother. We were together all the time. And these flashbacks started coming back of him sexually abusing me. He took advantage of me and of the trust I put in him and the trust that my mom put in him. And it was a shock to me. I was like, how could he do this, And the fact that he had gone 15 years, I was 20 whenever I remembered it. He'd gone 15 years without ever mentioning it, nothing. I watched him graduate high school. I watched him fall in love, get married, have kids. I've watched his kids grow up, and it was just like, how could he do this to me? And so I confronted him because I was kind of starting to wonder. I was like, well, is my mind playing tricks on me? Is this just, a lie and it's not true? I confronted him, and he admitted to it. He, immediately said, yes, I did do this to you. But the one thing that's different in my case and in a lot of people's cases that go through this is he asked for my forgiveness immediately. The very day that I brought it up to him, he said, "Will you forgive me?" Now, this was via email because he was overseas. And I was like, no, I can't. You don't deserve my forgiveness. But he would talk, he kept talking to me and trying to convince me, basically begging, saying, please forgive me, please forgive me. And I said, okay, I forgive you. But I didn't. I really didn't forgive him. I was like, you don't deserve it. You violated me. You broke my trust in you. Things are never going to be the same. And so after that, I stopped talking to him. I was like, I'm done. I don't want anything to do with you, your family. That included his wife, who I was very close to. She was like my sister. Whenever they were dating and got married, we were very close. But I just couldn't stand the thought of being with them, anywhere near them. I was like, no. Because he told his wife, and of course, she is an amazing woman, a woman of God, that she forgave him for what he did. And so I'm dealing with that now. That's, coming back. So I start seeing my counselor again on a weekly basis. And I was actually able to handle that situation a lot better than I did the situation before, just because I knew what I needed to do. And so things, are getting better. But again, I told him I forgave him, so he thought I had forgiven him. But for anyone in here that's ever carried around unforgiveness, you know how that feels, that it weighs you down. It's like you're carrying these chains around all the time. It's never ending. And that's what I felt. And I was like, I don't want this. I want to be happy. I want to be the kind of person that can go to work or can get up in the morning and smile. And just because I'm alive. And I was like, there's one person that I'd met up to that point that was like that I never saw her sad. I never saw her angry. All I saw was this joy. And Leanne actually mentioned it last week. It's a joy that Christians have that you see in them. There's something about a Christian that you can tell. And so that's where Christy comes into my life. When I met her when I was in housekeeping. I got a new job a couple of years later in the same department, but I kind of moved up the ladder, which was a really awesome job. But I got to start working with Christy a lot more, and she and I started talking. But it was never more than just, hey, how's it going? How are your kids? But one day I remember calling her up, and I was like, well, let's get together. I want to talk to you about something. Now, everyone in here that knows me knows I don't talk very much. I'm a pretty quiet person, and I don't share things. But with her, it was different. I was able to confide in her things that only my mom and therapist knew. And so I told her all this stuff, and I remember her telling me that she was going to help me get through this. She, laid hands on me and prayed over me, and I've never had that before. I've never had that experience. And it was an amazing one that I, will always remember. And so she, we started working through things together, and she kept inviting me to come to church. She was like, you should come to church with me. It's really laid back, so they don't care if you come in jeans or in a dress or in scrubs, whatever. Said, just come to church. That's all they care about. And I was like, no, because my idea of church is that if you didn't come dressed in your Sunday best, people were going to judge you. If you didn't act a certain way, people were going to be like, you don't need to be here. But she kept saying, she goes, come to church. Anytime you want, just show up. I knew where it was just because I know the area pretty well. And so one Sunday I was like, well, I'm going to go to church. I didn't tell her. I just showed up. And I can remember walking into this building. First person to greet me was Jason. Came up and gave me this big old hug. This is a man I've never met before. I was like, whoa. But it's one of those things that that Jamie mentioned a while back when they were talking about the visions of the church, and it's about being refreshing. And that's what it was when I walked in here. I felt this immediate, peace. I was like, it was comfortable. And I don't ever feel that whenever I'm around new people. I'm like, this is weird. I just don't usually fit in that well, but I did. And so this was in January of last year. Yeah. And the women's conference was coming up, or the women's revival is what we had it last year. And I decided I was going to go to that. I was like, oh, that'll be fun. That'll be an interesting experience. And little did I know how life-changing that first night was going to be. Through this time between when Christy and I first hung out, when I told her, to the women's conference, it had been about 3 months. And we, were constantly working through, she was trying to help me to forgive. She's like, you've got to forgive. Because if you don't, you're not going to be free and you can't really grow. Because I learned that very quickly, is you can't go anywhere until you forgive. And the Friday night was the women's only night, and at the end, they were letting people come up, be prayed over. And Christy, called me up here and she prayed over me and she asked me, she said, do you forgive your cousin? And that was the first time I had been able to say yes, and I actually meant it. I was like, yes, I forgive him. And that's actually it's a really awesome way that God works, is that today actually marks 1 year since I was able to forgive him. It's February 24th of last year. So that, I know that was a God thing. And so, I forgave him, and I'm telling you, it was like a weight was lifted off of me. I was like, wow, that's what it feels like, that joy. There's this, I can't even explain the joy that I felt after that. And so my life is just going great. It's getting so much better. We started this women's group that we started every Wednesday after the revival. I remember going, and I was like, I'll give it a try. It'll be, an interesting experience. And I remember the first couple weeks, I was like, this is not the place for me. It was just, I didn't feel like I fit in, because the women that were there were married, had kids. I had nothing really in common with them, because it's like they're, relating the stuff to their marriage, to their spouse, to their kids. And I was like, just don't think I can go back. And again, I told Christy that, and I can remember driving home one night, and I was crying at the thought of leaving the women's group, because there was a reason I was there. And in the last few months, God really confirmed that there's a reason I was there. There's people he's put in my life, and that I'm in their life for a reason. And so, I kept going, and I'm going to tell y'all, the women's group is probably one of the best blessings in my life. The women that I've been able to meet and talk to, they're the first people I opened up to outside of my little bubble that I had. And so the revival is over. I'm in the women's group where, things are just going wonderful. I'm like, well, I'm going to get baptized. I asked Christy about it, and she was like, you need to talk to Jason about that one. She said, just go to him. He can, give you the information. And so I did. And he's like, well, let's just pick a day. He said, pick a date and we'll do it. And I was like, okay. I'm pretty slow at picking dates. That's why it took me 3 months to get up here to do this. And so I remember saying, I was like, well, I don't want to get baptized until I've got everything sorted out in my life. Because I had, stress with my job, with family, et cetera. And Christy told me, she said, you're never going to have it all together. She said, if you keep waiting until it's all together, you're never going to get baptized. I was like, okay, you're right. Because it's just everything keeps coming back, And so I picked a day. I finally picked a day. It took me a while, but I picked it, and I took a week off of work, going on vacation, going to enjoy it. And I'm going to tell you, again, it's God and how amazing he is. The date I picked, it was May 27th. And it's a Sunday before that. I remember leaving church. We had stayed over. It was pretty long. Jason was probably preaching. And we stayed over, but it's awesome what happened. I'm driving home, and I was on the phone talking to Christy about something, and I pull down my driveway, and I see my cousin's truck. And I'm like, talking to her, and I start freaking out. I'm like, this is the first time I've seen him in 22 months. It had been that long. I had not spent Christmas with them, Thanksgiving, nothing. I was like, they're there. They're actually at the house. And so, I parked, I got off the phone with her, and I remember walking over there, and his wife came and greeted me, and she gave me a hug, and we, talked for a few minutes, not for very long. And I walked over to the house where they were at, where my aunt and uncle and cousin were, and he was, getting his kids buckled in, because they were just about to leave, and he turned and he looked at me, and it's one of those things you can't explain what it was like to see him for the first time since all of this had happened, to be right there. And we immediately embraced. And I really can't tell you what it felt like, but I remember him telling me, he said, "You're always going to be my little sister." And I knew then that that God had worked all of this out, because never once from the time I found out what he did did I ever hate him. I'd always loved him. I've always loved him, and I always will, because he was there for me. Yes, he did hurt me. He did violate me, but he was still my cousin. He was still like my brother, and we had been through a lot. And so forgiving him, it set me free, but it also set him free, because he was not the kind of person that wanted me to suffer. He didn't. He prayed for me. He constantly was, praying for me. His wife was praying for me, and he didn't have to do that. He could have been like, "No, I didn't do that to you," but he didn't. He owned up to it, and if he hadn't, and I'm very grateful to him for that. And so that just made the week perfect. It was the perfect week, and then I got baptized, and it's just like, wow, that's what it feels like. When you come out of that water, I'm a different person, and I really felt different. But there was one thing still I really wanted to work through, was the being on an antidepressant. I didn't want to be on them anymore. I was like, things are going well. I've got God in my life. I can do this. I don't need them. And so I stopped taking them. I completely stopped taking them, and that's not the best decision. But and I suffered some of the effects, but I was able to really push through it, and I was off of them. And I was happy, life was getting really good again, and it was around Christmas, this past Christmas. Jason, he mentioned it, that time of the year is the year that people, depression kind of starts to rise, and mine did, because I started thinking about my sister again. Started thinking about my other sister, who is, she's 33 and wants nothing to do with me. She doesn't want me in her life. She has 2 kids that she will not let me see. She holds them away from me, and so that really, it wears on me, because Christmas is my favorite time of the year. But this Christmas was one that I'm probably always going to remember. It's because it was the first Christmas I was able to spend with my family again. And I spent, I didn't get to spend that much time with them, but the time I was with them was pretty amazing, because to be able to stand in the same room with a man who abused me in that same room is something that not many people can say they can do. And I didn't have any hard feelings towards him. It was love. That's all I felt towards him, was love, instead of hatred or anger, because I felt the anger towards him. But it was gone. It was all gone. It was finished, It's what, it says, it's finished. And so it was. But, my depression's still kind of creeping back in, and I'm like, no, I don't want this. I don't want to be depressed anymore. I don't want to depend on medication. I talked to some of the women in my women's group, and they were like, if you need to take them, then you need to take them. They said, but if you don't, you don't. It's kind of one of those things that I needed to pray about, and I did. And I made the choice to not get back on them. But, again, the depression's still there, but the difference this time than last time is that I had God in my life, and he was the main thing in my life. But I also have a church family that I know I could go to any person in here and talk to, and they would pray for me. I have a group of women that I know I can always go to, and that's something I'm so grateful for, for Joanne, Bethany, Gwen, Tammy, Christy, Corey. There's some other ones that aren't here today, but to have them there to support me, I can't explain what it means to me. So I thank all of you, everyone in here that has been there for me. And so Proverbs 3, 5-6 says, trust in the Lord with all of your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your path straight. I can, really attest to that, because there's no way I would be up here right now if it wasn't for him. Because this is not me. I'm not someone that gets in front of a group. This is the biggest group of people I've ever spoken in front of. I've never shared my story like this in front of people, but I did it because I knew I had to, because I couldn't keep what God has done for me, and he's done this in a year, in just 1 year, that I couldn't keep it from the church and from everyone here, because I don't know, it could help someone. I hope it does. But I know that he's always going to be there for me. He's the one person I can depend on no matter what, that he's never going to leave me or abandon me. And I'm grateful for that. I'm thankful for everyone. I mean, everybody in this room. I may not talk to y'all. I may not know y'all very well, but I'm a watcher. I watch people. And so I kind of see things in people, and that it really impacts, I will tell you, it impacts people, the things that you do. And, never underestimate a job, what a job can do for you. Because I never in my life thought that working in housekeeping would have me where I'm at now. But I know that if I had left that job in housekeeping like I had intended to, I wouldn't be here right now, because I wouldn't have met Christy. She wouldn't have invited me to this church. And I wouldn't be up here right now telling y'all my story. So, thank you.